In the biblical story of Cain and Abel, we have a record of one of the most important conflicts in the history of mankind. The conflict between the agriculturalists and the pastoralists. Perhaps the very same story told in the mythological war between the Titans and the Olympians, the Aesir and the Vanir. Imagine that you are a Neolithic European farmer, laboring in the hot fields outside of your village. Suddenly you hear rumbling like thunder, even though the sky is cloudless from horizon to horizon. You look up and you see something you have never seen. Men riding horses, backlit by the blazing sun. You drop your tools and run for the village walls, but it is too late. You cannot outrun the horses. The Indo-Europeans were a nomadic people who first harnessed the power of the domesticated horse and the chariot to expand out from the Russian steppe, conquering the native farmer populations of Europe, the Middle East, and spreading all the way to India, imposing their gods and caste systems upon the local populations. We know from skeletal remains that the Indo-Europeans were much larger than the native European farmers, and had larger skulls with stronger jaws, likely due to their diets rich in dairy. The agriculturalists had smaller statures and skeletal structures, and were likely vulnerable to disease due to their diets and lifestyle. In all Indo-European religions, there exists the record of a colossal war between two races of gods. In Greek mythology, it is the war between the Titans and the Olympians. In Norse mythology, between the Aesir and the Vanir. And in Hinduism, between the Devas and the Asuras. Some have speculated that this could be a record of the Indo-European conquest of the native farmer populations, whose gods were subsequently overthrown and submitted to the rule of the Indo-European deities. Many have pointed to the fact that the older generation of gods, the Titans and the Vanir, generally seem to represent more chthonic forces, while the Olympians and Aesir are more celestial in nature. However, it's not quite so simple, and it could be argued that it is more likely that this story is much older and traveled with the Indo-Europeans. Either way, as we know from the fact that we are sitting in houses right now, the agricultural way of life would eventually prevail over the nomadic way. As the nomadic Indo-Europeans settled in their conquered lands, they were integrated into agricultural societies and became the ruling castes of the great civilizations of Europe and the Near East. Thus, while their nomadic lifestyle disappeared, the values and religious customs of the Indo-Europeans were preserved in the aristocracies of the ruling castes of these societies. However, the agriculturalists would eventually prevail in this regard too. Nietzsche called this the transvaluation of all values, or the slave revolt in morality, in which the European, pagan, aristocratic ethos was overthrown by the slave religion of Christianity. Nietzsche writes, "The two opposing values, good and bad, good and evil, have fought a dreadful 1,000-year fight in the world. And though, indubitably, the second value has been for a long time in the preponderance, there are not wanting places where the fortune of the fight is still undecisive." It can almost be said that in the meanwhile, the fight reaches a higher and higher level, and that in the meanwhile, it has become more and more intense, and always more and more psychological, so that nowadays there is perhaps no more decisive mark of the higher nature, of the more psychological nature, than to be in that sense self-contradictory, and to be actually still a battleground for those two opposites. The symbol of the fight, written in a writing which has remained worthy of pursuit throughout the course of history up to this present time, is called Rome against Judea, Judea against Rome. Nietzsche writes this because Christianity, which began among the Jews who were conquered by Rome, and was formed as a reaction to Roman power, would eventually conquer Rome, and even all of Europe, slowly eating away at the traces of the values and religions of the Indo-Europeans. Nietzsche writes that this reversal of the pagan aristocratic ethos was completed with the French Revolution, which overturned the last vestiges of the Indo-European aristocracy, and that Napoleon was the last chance to return to the aristocratic warrior ethos of the Indo-Europeans. The story of Cain killing Abel on the one hand represents the slave caste of farmers who were conquered by the nomadic peoples, rising up and killing their masters, and on the other hand, the larger conflict between the pastoralist and agricultural lifestyles, in which agricultural civilization eventually won out. For this reason, we can see that it is fitting that the field, the place of agriculture, is where Cain takes Abel to kill him. The way of the nomadic pastoralist dies in the field. In the story of Adam and Eve, being cast out of Eden was representative of the transition from animal to man, and from a hunter-gatherer way of life into a more civilized one. Adam's punishment for eating the forbidden fruit was being bound to the earth in toilsome agricultural labor, and Eve's punishment was being bound to Adam in painful childbirth. But in the story of Abel and Cain, we see that a remnant of the free way of life in Eden, remains, the nomadic, pastoralist lifestyle represented by Abel. Cain has inherited Adam's curse of being bound to the earth, but Abel is free from it, living instead off of his mobile flocks. In the story of Cain and Abel, the victory of the agricultural way of life is represented as a bad thing, almost as a second fall from Eden. In Genesis 4, after Cain kills Abel, God says to Cain, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground, so now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be on the earth." After killing Abel, Cain becomes an outcast, just as Adam and Eve first became outcasts among God's creations when they acquired higher cognition. Further, Adam's punishment of agricultural labor becoming painful is replicated as the ground is made even harder to till for Cain. Genesis 4 goes on to say that Enoch, Cain's son, created cities, a further estrangement from nature. But since the time of this ancient biblical story, we have created industrial, and now what might even be called digital society, making us even more far removed from Eden. Of course, agricultural, industrial, and digital civilization have lended us great benefits, but they have also come with a great danger. The danger of permanently losing the grace and power of our ancestors, the danger of a never-ending descent into the abyss. The farther we stray from living in alignment with nature and nature's laws, the less free we become, and the less we are favored by the gods. Given the current direction of our civilization, we will all end up being frail, sickly creatures, living in an industrial slum, living the lives of insects. But it is not too late to aim for a different future. It is not too late to correct the course of human civilization and to re-establish a free way of life in alignment with the principles of nature for those who desire it. Though we may not ride horses through the open plains again, we can still aspire to a life on the Olympian heights, a life among the cool, free clouds, a life with eyes set on distant peaks. And when the masses of man all look down and drown themselves in filth and ugliness, is it not all the sweeter to be one of the few who looks up?